Lewis Hamilton has gone quiet, and a Ferrari insider just revealed the real story everyone's been trying to figure out. What actually changed? Why did a driver who couldn't buy a podium in 2025 suddenly become one of the most dangerous drivers on the grid in 2026? And why did it take someone from inside Maranello, not Hamilton himself, to finally explain it? Stick around, because this isn't the story fans expected, and it says something deeper about what Lewis Hamilton has been quietly going through behind the scenes. Let's rewind to where this really begins, because you can't understand the reveal without understanding the fall first. Lewis Hamilton's first season at Ferrari, back in 2025, was as brutal as it gets for a driver of his stature. No wins, no poles, no podiums, not a single one in an entire season. For context, that had never happened to him before in his entire career. 20 years in the sport, 7 world championships, and suddenly, at Ferrari of all places, he couldn't find a single top 3 finish. Reports at the time described insiders close to Hamilton saying he wasn't exactly full of excitement about where things stood. Not devastated publicly, not making excuses, just quiet. And in Formula One, when a 7-time champion goes quiet instead of loud, that silence tends to say more than any interview ever could. So what was actually happening underneath that silence? For months, fans were left guessing. Was it the car? Was it Hamilton's age, at 41, finally catching up to him? Was it simply a mismatch between a legendary driver and a team with its own deeply ingrained way of doing things? Charles Leclerc, his teammate, was beating him head-to-head by a staggering margin, 18 wins to 3 in their direct qualifying and race battles across the season. That kind of gap, for a driver with Hamilton's resume, doesn't just raise questions, it practically demands an explanation. And for a long time, nobody inside Ferrari was giving one publicly. Then came 2026, and everything flipped. New regulations arrived across the entire sport, a near-total reset of the technical rulebook. Smaller, lighter cars. A completely different balance between the combustion engine and electrical power. And almost overnight, Hamilton looked like a different driver. 4th place in Australia, 3rd in China. Ferrari's first podium double of the year came later at Silverstone. And then, the moment everyone had been waiting for, victory in Barcelona, Hamilton's first win in Ferrari red, arriving after 686 days without a single Grand Prix win anywhere. 686 days. Sit with that number for a second. That's not a slump. That's nearly 2 years of a 7-time world champion being asked, over and over, whether he'd made the biggest mistake of his career. So here's the real question everyone wanted answered. What actually flipped the switch? Was it just a better car? Was it something about Hamilton himself? Or was it something quieter? Something that had been building in the background the entire time, invisible to everyone watching from the outside. This is where the insider comes in. Marc Genet, a former Ferrari test and reserve driver, now head of the Ferrari Driver Academy, and a respected Sky Sport commentator, shared insight into exactly what's been driving Hamilton's turnaround. And his explanation wasn't about a single dramatic fix. It was about something far more human. According to Genet, part of what's different in 2026 comes down to simple familiarity. Hamilton finally understanding the team, the environment, the internal rhythms of Ferrari after a full year of immersion. But there was something more specific too. Genet pointed out that this year's car appears to actually suit Hamilton's driving style in a way last year's car didn't. Not marginally. Meaningfully. He described it directly, saying Hamilton is more competitive now because the car fits his style so much better, and that after a year of working together, Hamilton and the team understand each other, particularly on details as specific as power steering feel and brake response. He even used the word mutual, describing it as a two-way adjustment, not just Hamilton adapting to Ferrari, but Ferrari adapting to Hamilton as well. Think about what that actually means. For an entire season, fans speculated about Hamilton losing his edge, about age catching up, about a bad fit that might never be solved. And the real story, according to someone who spent his career inside that same garage, wasn't about decline at all. It was about integration, the unglamorous, unseen process of a 7-time champion and a historic team slowly learning each other's language. That's not the kind of story that makes headlines in real time. There's no dramatic press conference for, "We spent a year quietly recalibrating." But it's exactly the kind of explanation that actually holds up once you look at the results. And it's not just Gené's account. Other voices inside the sport have echoed a similar theme. Two-time world champion Emerson Fittipaldi pointed to something more technical, suggesting that the smaller, lighter regulations for 2026 have specifically brought Hamilton's natural car control back to the forefront, playing to strengths that simply weren't being rewarded by last year's heavier, more cumbersome machinery. Former Ferrari driver Gerhard Berger described genuine happiness watching both Hamilton and the team return to winning form after a first year together that fell short of what everyone expected. When multiple people with real inside knowledge of Ferrari's world all converge on a similar explanation, car fit, growing familiarity, regulations finally suiting his strengths, that stops looking like speculation. It starts looking like the truth finally catching up to the narrative. So what does Hamilton himself say about all this? Rather than dwelling on the past, he's been remarkably forward-focused. Speaking about the season, he's pointed to a straight-line speed deficit of 3 to 4 tenths compared to Mercedes across the first half of the year, and expressed genuine confidence that Ferrari's upcoming upgrades could close that gap even further in the second half. He's talked about the team pushing hard, bringing new parts weekend after weekend, with more still in the pipeline. There's a quiet confidence in that kind of language. Not the words of a driver still questioning his decision to leave Mercedes, but the words of someone who has settled in and is now simply focused on the next step forward. There's also a smaller but telling detail that fits into this same story. Hamilton revealing that he'd made the decision to step back from using Ferrari's simulator, preferring instead to rely on real seat time and feel. He explained the sensations from the simulator simply weren't matching what he was experiencing in the actual car. And what's fascinating is that this same approach appeared to influence his teammate too. Charles Leclerc went on to win the British Grand Prix shortly after, as Ferrari recorded their first double podium since Hamilton had joined the team. Small decisions like that, made quietly, without fanfare, are often exactly the kind of thing that ends up mattering the most. It's worth pausing here to really think about what this reveals about how Formula One stories actually work. From the outside, fans build narratives in real time, race by race, based on results and body language and post-race sound bites. But the real story, the actual mechanics of why a 7-time champion goes from winless to unstoppable, almost never happens in front of the cameras. It happens in debriefs, in simulator sessions that get quietly abandoned, in a race engineer learning exactly how a driver likes to feel the brake pedal bite, in a full year of small, invisible adjustments that only make sense once you can see the whole picture at once. That's exactly what Gené's comments gave fans. Not a highlight, but the connective tissue between one disastrous season and one triumphant comeback. And that context changes how you look back at Hamilton's silence during 2025. It wasn't the silence of a driver who had run out of answers. It was the silence of someone who understood that the real answer, patience, adaptation, trust built over time, wasn't something you could explain in a 30-second post-race interview. Some transformations just take longer to explain than they take to happen. And in Hamilton's case, it took almost an entire season for the truth to fully reveal itself, both on the timing sheets and in the words of the people who watched it happen up close. There's another angle worth exploring here too, the psychological weight of what Hamilton was carrying during that difficult first year. This is a driver who spent over a decade as the benchmark at Mercedes, a team built almost entirely around his feedback and his driving style. Arriving at Ferrari meant starting over in a way very few champions ever have to. New engineers who didn't yet know his instincts. A car philosophy shaped by years of working with a different driver in Leclerc. Every adjustment Hamilton wanted had to be earned, race by race, rather than assumed the way it might have been at a team he'd spent 13 years building from the inside out. That's an enormous amount of change to absorb at once, and it's easy to forget just how disorienting that must have been for someone operating at the highest level of a sport that rewards muscle memory and instinct above almost everything else. So when Gené talks about mutual adjustment, he's really describing something much bigger than setup sheets and brake bias. He's describing a relationship being rebuilt from scratch, under the brightest spotlight in motorsport, with the entire world watching every lap for signs of decline instead of signs of progress. That Hamilton pushed through that, stayed quiet instead of making excuses, and let the results eventually speak for themselves. That says as much about his mentality as it does about anything mechanical on the car. So let's bring this back to where we started. Lewis Hamilton went silent during the hardest season of his Formula One career. Not because he had nothing to say, but because there wasn't yet a real story to tell. No dramatic turning point, no single fix. Just time, adjustment, and two sides slowly learning how to work together. And now that the results have arrived, a race win, a podium streak, a genuine title fight still alive heading into the second half of the season, the people inside Ferrari are finally able to explain what fans outside the garage could never fully see for themselves. That leaves us with one final question worth sitting with. If it really did just take time and mutual adjustment to unlock this version of Lewis Hamilton, what does that mean for the rest of this season, and for whatever comes after it? Is this the version of Hamilton Ferrari signed him for in the first place, just delayed by a difficult first year? Or is there still another level left to find, now that the foundation has finally been built? What do you think? Was this really just about the car fitting his style? Or is there more to Hamilton's turnaround than even the insiders are letting on? Drop your take in the comments below because this conversation is far from over. And if you want to keep up with every twist in Hamilton's Ferrari story as the second half of the season unfolds, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. There's a lot more of this comeback still to be written. See you in the next one.